Hi, everybody. This is Rahul with the Alternative Investors Hangout, and today we have here Michael Woody of AbolishFiatSlavery.com. He's also a money manager as well. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Great to be with you.
All right. Today I wanted to get into the topic of Nixon's reversal of the gold standard. Before I get into this topic, I wanted to touch on Bretton Woods and what happened there in 1944 in New Hampshire. We know that Lord Keynes met there with a bunch of elitists, and they pretty much set the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And also, this meeting led to the failure of the gold standard in 1971. So why did Bretton Woods pretty much mean that the gold standard would go bust in 1971?
Well, you needed to have some kind of a new currency order and a world a monetary exchange system after World War II, just so we could kind of get to a more modernized post-war economy. But the idea of having more of a fixed currency relationship, it really doesn't work even in theory. And the reason is because the value of things change every single day. The value of apples change every single day because all apples and all assets are in a constant state of motion, almost like whitewater rafting. All prices of things relate to the prices of other things. And I always like to use the example of if you had a freeze in Florida that wiped out the orange crop, well, that would be good for the grapefruit crop that was grown, in another country. Because if there was less orange juice available, prices would go up to a point people would substitute and drink more grapefruit. So having a system into a ban or peg to something to try and get to artificial stability is just not going to work. The only thing that has worked historically over time to provide currency stability is connection to either an asset like gold or silver, or a pool of assets, the way that the Swiss franc has been managed for a very, very long time. That it's a basket of commodities that backs up the Swiss franc. So basically, Bretton Woods set forth this fantasy of currency stability that was destined to fail and destined to collapse because countries grow at different rates, their economies have positive or negative things about them. And just like a stock in the stock market, that needs to float. It got to the point, I would say, when we got to where Nixon was in August 15th, 1971, when we went off the gold standard, it really had more to do in terms of the timing with the fact that we were running massive deficits from the Vietnam War. We were trying to have what Johnson called guns and butter at the same time. And, when the French showed up and said, we don't think you have all the gold for this money that you're printing, we had a big trade surplus with France. I guess we were buying a lot of French wine at that time, and the French wanted the gold, and Nixon wasn't willing to let that gold depart. So, voila, the gold window closes. And I think for most older Americans who can remember a time of more relative stability in the economy, and can think from that 1971 forward to where we're at here in 2012, essentially 90% of the economic turmoil of the 230-year history of the United States has occurred since 1971. This moving off the gold standard was a catastrophic mistake. And one way or the other, whether it's through hyperinflationary collapse or through sober judgment, we're going to get back to a gold standard somewhere in the not too distant future.
All right. Speaking before Charles de Gaulle wanted his gold, I believe in 1968, we know that the London gold pool, they pretty much rigged the price of gold. So how did that situation work out? How were they able to maintain the price of gold at $35 an ounce?
Well, there's always been manipulation in precious metals markets, but it was a much more closed market then. There were many, many fewer players that were involved. It's kind of like saying, if I had a room full of 6 people, I could easily get consensus. If I had a room full of 6,000, that's a much, much trickier thing to do. There was a very small number of interested parties in gold. I always like to use the example is that the last time that gold of the uh, of the interest in gold that there is now, and there was a tenth of the people who owned any. There was literally no peasant in China who owned any gold. They had a very underdeveloped economy. Now there's a great deal of interest in gold and silver bullion around the world. A lot of people don't know this, but technically, India is really the richest country in the world because they have a religious tradition that involves gold bullion. There's more individually owned gold bullion per capita in India than any other country in the world. And if you think of that in the broadest terms, where all this fiat money sloshing around the world is functionally toilet paper, it's functionally worthless. If all the facts were to be known, the Indians could buy and sell all of us.
That is true, the Indian people, but I believe the Chinese government is stockpiling a lot more gold than the Indian people. Is that true?
I believe that they are. The Chinese have good reason to kind of be secretive about how much gold they're actually having when they do kind of make their announcements. There always seems to be some really big leap. It would not surprise me if basically the Chinese government was, vacuuming up all the gold that's being produced in China, which is a very substantial amount. But again, no one really knows the real number. And I would suggest to you, this is one of the reasons that bullion prices are so low, because the total amount of money that's in circulation in the world and the total amount of credit is really something that's unknown. I mean, you listen to people talk about, what is M3, the total aggregate of money in the U.S. that the Federal Reserve used to publish, and you get numbers anywhere from 4 trillion to, say, 35 trillion or so. That's an awful big range of how much money and credit is really out there in the American economy. Of course, there's an awful lot of U.S. dollars that are held by people overseas. There are economies like Zimbabwe and Mexico where the average person walking around has U.S. dollars in their pocket. So it really is one of those, because no one knows the size of the pile of paper. It's very difficult to make a judgment as to what the true price of gold in dollars should be, other than it certainly should be higher than it is.
Right. You're talking about the gold price being low, but isn't that due to central bank intervention? I mean, you have guys at GATA saying that central banks around the world are rigging the price of gold. This is pretty much the London Gold Pool Part 2, but now they have option swaps and derivatives.
That's correct. And I would always point out that, there obviously has been massive manipulation and massive suppression of gold price in the past 10 years. But at the same token, you also have to admit that that has certainly been a good thing for gold investors, because it's kept the price low for them to buy. And it's certainly been a failure, because after 9/11, we were looking at gold $275 to $300 an ounce in that range. And, now we're knocking on the door of 1800 again. So the effort has been a failure. And one of the reasons that it's in fact necessary is because these banks for a long period of time have made a lot of money in selling gold and then going out and speculating with the money, almost like a carry trade. But at the end of the day, it's really not working. And at some point in time, all the people who've had an interest in suppressing the price of bullion, especially, really criminal bankster firms like J.P. Morgan, are going to throw in the towel and get long. And when you don't have central banks selling and leasing gold, and you don't have manipulators selling and leasing gold, you're going to have those people going long. And it's really going to come a question of what's the price going to go when no one was really interested in selling anymore. I have heard people make the case that the price of gold should be or will be anything from 35, which is my kind of, it must get to that number at a minimum, to anywhere up to 50,000. And depending on, again, how much money is really floating around out there, none of those numbers are really off the table. My own feeling is the economy is in such desperate shape because of unsound money. And what Nixon did was such a catastrophic mistake that literally